KUCI 88.9 FM in Irvine. And standing by to join me is Lauren Tarshis, and she is New York Times best-selling author and Senior Vice President and Editor-in-Chief, publisher of Scholastic Classroom Magazines. I'm really excited to have her on the show. We're going to talk about her I Survived series and her latest, I Survived the Attacks of September 11th, 2001. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Janeane. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. I always like to jump in. How did you, or when did you know you wanted to be a writer?
Oh boy. Well, I have a story that I love to share with every kid I meet, because I tell them that even though my dad was a writer when I was growing up, in fact, I'm at my parents' house right now, and my dad is still working like a mad scientist at the age of 81 down in his basement.
Love it.
It seemed to be an absolute impossibility that I could ever be a writer like my dad, because I had a reading struggle when I was growing up. So I didn't actually read a book cover to cover till I was 14 years old. So I did sort of, I loved my dad. It wasn't the best way to earn a living, as he would be the first to admit.
Sure.
But I knew he loved what he did, and he was always meeting fascinating people and traveling to different places and sitting in this messy little office and typing until midnight. And so I had this inspiration, but none of this ever seemed possible to me. So it really wasn't until, college where I kind of figured out how to read, all these doors opened in my mind. And that's, they kind of took it from there. But fiction was a whole other story, because I started out really wanting to be more of a journalist, and I didn't rediscover the world of children's literature, which of course I had completely missed as a child until I was in my 30s. Yeah. And it was reading those books for my job at Scholastic that caused me to fall in love with children's literature and become determined to learn how to write a novel. So it's a long story, Janeane, my whole journey of becoming a writer, but I love to share that story with kids because, one of the themes of my I Survived series is sort of resilience and overcoming challenges. And even though I have not, fortunately been in like a volcanic eruption or, some of the terrifying events that I write about, I overcome, not really knowing what you're capable of,
right.
Setting out to learn it is something that it's a message I really love to share with kids.
Well, there's another message from what I'm hearing you say, and I want to tell you that I was not a very good student growing up, was not a good reader. And
here you are.
Well, it's funny. And so my message, and I'm hearing what you say, is that, you know what, don't think that when you get in those moments where you're not doing well in school, you're bombing your SATs, you're a D or an F student, those were all me, by the way, that predicts your future, because it doesn't. And I feel like you have created a series that perhaps could have really helped you as a kid.
Well, I think that, one of the missions of my series, because now I've been doing it for more than 10 years, I'm just starting my 22nd I Survived book. And now we have these graphic novels that are spinning off from the series. So one of the things that I'm very committed to, and it's a huge part of what keeps me writing the series, is that so many, to your point, so many of my readers are not what they would not describe themselves as readers. They're not the kids huddled under their covers with a flashlight reading Lord of the Rings when they're 9 years old, like my friend Michelle did. They're kids who, many of them say, I don't like to read. I'm a terrible reader. And your book was the first I ever read, your Titanic book. And I always write back and say, well, my books are actually not that easy, so you can hear the planes going overhead here.
I know, it's fine. And I hear crickets or something.
Yes, I'm here in my parents' courtyard here in Connecticut. But I really want to create books that are accessible to all kinds of readers. And many of my readers are kids who are fragile readers or struggling readers, or they're English as a second language kids. And the goal for me is to be able to give them access to these really important, really fascinating stories. Because even though you don't love to read, I can tell that you were probably this way too. You and I would have gotten along well, because even when you're struggling to read or not a great student or resisting, these, your class lessons, that doesn't mean you're not incredibly curious.
Yes.
Doesn't mean you don't want to have these fascinating conversations.
Yes.
So to give
Right.
kids access to history, to help them understand the relevance, to engage them, to hopefully you read a D-Day book that, that you somehow connect to, and then all these little doors in your mind fling open and you want to read more about, World War II or, France or,
Yes.
so
Yes. And I don't know if this helped you, but I was the kind of kid that would ask my teacher, instead of doing the test, could I do a project? Can I
yeah.
do some kind of creative thing? And, I always say there's so many different types of intelligence, which and I love just how you found your groove. Your dad must be proud of you. Here you are.
He is very proud. He probably wants to come out and say hi to you, Janeane.
Just say hi.
Yes, but yes, he is. My parents are. And I going back to what you said, I love what you said about, telling kids. I always tell them every time I talk to kids, which is all the time, whether it's now by Zoom or in person, I say, I was the last person. I show them my sixth grade picture of all the sixth graders, and I say, I remember this day. And if you had asked all those kids on that day, who was the last person they would expect to grow up to be an author, they would have pointed at me. And it's funny because I just went to one of my high school reunions a couple weeks ago, and it was so lovely because, again, I was like the last person anyone expected to be an author and to do the things that I'm doing. And it was just they were very just so kind and happy for me. No, I think they knew, like, this didn't seem to be in the cards at all. They said it in a nice way.
Anything's possible, though.
Yeah, it is. And kids know that.
Did you go to high school in Connecticut?
I did. Staples High School.
What is it?
Staples High School.
Oh, I know Staples. We played against them. I went to O'Haywood.
Oh, yes, you did. We were rivals, I think.
Yes. Yes, I think I got mowed down on the basketball court by some Staples or lacrosse, one of them.
We'll have to find the person who did that to you.
So funny. I want to jump into your latest book because my dad was supposed to be in the second tower on 9/11. I have his ID. And for people that grew up on the East Coast, witnessing or being in the city or knowing people, it's so emotional for us. That's an understatement. How tough was it to write a children's book about this topic? Because it's an important topic.
Well, I never imagined I would write about 9/11 when I first had the idea for the I Survived series. I thought I was going to be writing about long ago natural disasters. And I thought, I'm just going to write 4 little historical fiction stories. They'll be about these long ago events, like the Titanic and the children's blizzard of 1888. And they'll be super easy to write. And then I'll go back because I had actually started writing another series. I had 2 books out that were a much different, more literary series called Emma Jean Lazarus Fell Out of a Tree. I thought I'll write these little I Survived books and I'll go back to Emma Jean and that'll be that. And it was just, no one really, I think, expected many kids to want to read them. I just thought, I want to fill that place. Parents will understand this. Between on the library shelf, I felt there was a gap between the Magic Treehouse books, which are those first, kind of great early chapter books, and then Rick Riordan's Lightning Thief. So for boys or kids who really need to be engaged, those 2 series are so fabulous. And I thought it was hard for me to find books for my kids that were a bridge between. So that was really my goal. And again, it was just these kind of, little lightish historical fiction books.
Yeah.
Very quickly, I started to, right after the first 2 books came out, they came out in quick succession, the Titanic and the Shark Attacks. I started getting deluged with email and mail from readers wanting asked, and they were filled with ideas. They wanted to tell me what they wanted to read about. And 9/11 was by far the topic that they kept asking for. I mean, I think in the end, I think I once tallied it up and it was close to 2,000 letters and emails from kids over the years. And at first it just seemed like an impossibility. Like how could I possibly write about that for kids? Why would I possibly write about that for kids? But then after a while, I started to think, well, wait a minute. These kids who were not born yet when this happened, must understand that their world in some ways was shaped by this. These anniversaries would come and the heaviness and the emotion, you referenced that, of that day. And I started to hear from teachers and librarians and booksellers who said, there really are not many books that are safe, and I put that in quotes, ways for kids to begin to explore this topic. And we don't, you can go online and see all sorts of things that are very overwhelming and terrifying.
Right.
So I finally decided that I would write about this event. It was very challenging, by far the most. I mean, they're all super challenging, my books. I was wrong about them being easy. They're incredibly, they're very torturous to write. The joy I feel at connecting with kids is sort of the great, reward I get, because each one, I travel to the place that I write about. I interview lots of different experts, whether it's tornado experts or historians who are experts in the Revolutionary War, museums, many, many books, articles, videos, all of that.
You do a lot of homework.
A lot of homework, and then creating the fictional characters in their world, and then interweaving them, and then trying to add a plot that keeps those fragile, reluctant readers, like my kids, my own sons, reading. So they're all difficult, but 9/11, which had such immediacy, and I know, I work in New York City. I happened to be in the air when this happened and was turned around in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and sent back to England and separated from our kids. So which was nothing compared to what happened to, my friends and family members who were in New York on that day, some of whom escaped the towers. So the whole thing was just, is so fraught. And the research is so painful because you can truly immerse yourself in every second of what happened that day that's so meticulously documented. So it was just a very agonizing, and the whole time I thought, this is not going to, I'm not going to do a good job, and I'm going to disappoint the first responders who I want to honor in this book, all that. But in the end, I did decide to make it really about the family of the son of a firefighter and a story of his family, and to take it beyond just 9/11, to start, to make it about, to give my character Lucas, my main character, a little more of a front story than I did in some of the other books. So he, he is grappling with a concussion that is potentially taking away his great love of football. And he's had this issue in his family involving his father, who's a firefighter, who was injured a few years ago in a Brooklyn warehouse fire. I had read a lot about New York City firefighters and, just what it's like for those families when they're. So in the end, that was the story. And I call it, in some ways, it's sort of I create a safe kind of silo for my readers to understand that day, to understand what happened, to understand how we united, without exposing them to some of the aspects of 9/11 that are not, that are way too complicated. My book is intended to be a door opener, a way to start discussions. But and now, that book was written, I guess 10 years ago now, no, 5 years ago now. And what's new is the graphic novel that has just come out in time for the 20th anniversary. And that book is my characters and my plot, but this incredible artist named Corey Egbert took my characters and plot and a script by this wondrous Georgia Ball, who's done 4 adaptations of my books into graphic novels. And they've created this really beautiful, powerful work of art that I just got to watch being created.
Amazing.
And helped, with some of the historical stuff. So.
Now, your role at Scholastic came before your desire to write, or was it kind of blended?
It was blended. I mean, after college, I started working at Scholastic 30 years ago. And, it was in writing for a high school magazine about current events. It was the closest I could come to getting a real newspaper job, which is really what I wanted. And again, I hadn't read any Scholastic books as a child. I was not one of those people who had great nostalgia over book fairs or book clubs, like many of my friends. Because for me,
excuse me, I have to see you in that interview. So tell me, why do you want to work here? I want to be a fan of our books. Nope, not really.
Not at all. No, I mean,
I'm not a reader.
It's true. Well, our magazine division, which was the founding division of Scholastic, our founder, Maurice Robinson, founded Scholastic 101 years ago with a single magazine for high school students. So that was the seed from which sprouted the beautiful empire of, which is now we're the largest children's publisher in the world.
Yeah.
Division is now also a big, robust division, which we are called Magazines Plus, because it's not only 25 different magazines cutting across all the grade levels and the content areas, but also incredible digital resources that enable teachers to turn articles and stories and plays into learning journeys.
I love that.
So it's very much the same. You're right. It's very much the same mission. And my desire to write fiction really did evolve through just being in the soil of Scholastic. It's hard not to do that. So, but my series, which is sort of my separate side gig, and my work on magazines are, of course, completely intertwined, and very much a part of this sort of unified, I don't want to seem grandiose, but this mission of helping kids understand themselves in the world, giving kids access to facts. And I think now more than ever, one of the things I really appreciate about being able to write I Survived is that the stories seem to be very uniting to, and that I can go to Texas, I can go to New York City, all these different places where people feel, where, we seem to, be more and more divided, but there are a lot of very shared American values and stories that we all can feel really excited and invested in.
Yes.
So now I think more than ever, it feels really good to be writing about, stories that bring us together in conversation and shared remembrance.
Yes. Well, think about, as you said, you could have conversations in Texas with the kids reading your books, conversations in New York. You could do things on Zoom with them.
Yeah.
And we need that unity. And I believe it really starts with kids. Obviously, right. Kids aren't born with hate and, prejudice and things like that. It's learned.
You're right. It's true. And I think kids really are curious. And so it's providing stories. Stories are just very powerful ways of helping kids explore history and to starting conversations. And I think also building empathy for people who aren't exactly like them and have different experiences. And the other thing I'm really trying to do in the series, because, kids always say to me, they're like, they have such wonderful questions about the series, and they say, one kid wrote to me once, and it's my all-time favorite email. He said, "Dear Mrs. Tarshis," and he had this really great handwriting. It was like in pencil, gripped. "And why do you write about topics that are so depressing? Depressing." Okay. And I really thought about it. I was like, oh my goodness, you are right. These are very super depressing.
Heavy topics. Yeah.
Very heavy in story. But I really thought about, his name was Travis, and I really thought about Travis's question before I wrote back to him. And I wrote back perhaps more more lyrically than he needed to hear. But I realized that having spent all these years writing about these topics and meeting so many people who've gone through difficult events and come through them, it's made me more hopeful. Because it's given me, I think, a more realistic understanding of what resilience is. It's not instantly bouncing back. It doesn't mean you don't go through periods of terrible grief and pain sometimes and loss. But I am just amazed time and time again by the real people I meet who've been through events like Hurricane Katrina or the fires in Paradise, California. These are, topics I've written about, or people whose stories I uncover through their memoirs or diaries that were long ago. My own mother is a survivor of, my mother-in-law who lived with us for 10 years, was a Holocaust survivor who's today this would be her 100th birthday. In fact, she died just a few years ago, but she too, the stories of what she went through, and then juxtaposing those experiences with her booming laugh and her zeal for life and her joy. It doesn't mean that she doesn't have scars.
Sure.
It doesn't mean that she didn't have very haunted memories.
That's right.
Her capacity to go on and have kids and have a marriage and travel the world and love to drink wine and chocolate and read voraciously. Those are I think I want to show kids those models.
Right. Well, you think about different people, let's say they're Paralympians, right? Yep. And they went to Amy Purdy, for example, okay? You think about that story, you think, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for her, which we do. However, look at the flip side, what she did with her life.
Yeah.
We actually have a family member who lost limbs to, this awful bacteria and went on to become a spokeswoman and wanted to get a cheetah blade and go off and train for the Paralympics. So I love that you teach resilience. I think it's a very important lifelong lesson because things happen.
They do. And I think right now with the pandemic, kids are getting a big dose of this. And I think that so many teachers, I mean, teachers are experiencing so many challenges right now all across the country. And yet so many of the teachers that I've been talking to, just like, I'm just dazzled by them, and they're present for their kids. And they really so many of them have shared that they do understand that this is this incredible opportunity for them to show kids what it means to be able to pivot and react.
Yes.
And they feel that they're sort of these living, breathing lessons. And, the Zoom didn't work. Let's try Google Meet. Well, then now the internet's down. So what do we do? So I do think that is an American quality. I don't know. I choose, again, to be very hopeful that we can find our shared values and through these shared stories.
I think it's important. And I think with kids reading your books, they'll be inspired to be writers as well.
I hope so. And I keep telling kids there are a lot of kids are saying, are you going to write about COVID-19? And I say, what I would say is that you guys should write about this. This is your story. History is not just dates and facts. In fact, you have to have your dates and facts correct. But it's really stories of ordinary people. And I say your kids and grandchildren are going to think you are just the most awesome. And they're going to want you to come to speak to their classes about your experiences going through this pandemic. And I hope you have a little box that you're going to save a mask, and you're going to save that takeout menu that you ordered a million times during lockdown. And you're going to share a screenshot of the Zoom of your whole class, because those are going to be precious artifacts that either you or a future writer is going to think of as gold. Because that's how I feel when I'm writing, when I wrote my next book about the Galveston hurricane, which is coming out next week, that's an event that happened next week is the 21st I Survived.
Great.
But that book is, I was able to utilize, it was so well documented, and the Historical Society in Galveston has collected so many firsthand stories of the people and preserved maps and artifacts. So those stories and the people who went through those experiences, their voices are still very much the voices that are telling this story.
That's amazing. I do some talks for schools, and one of the things I'm trying to get kids to do is write about something really positive that happened. So it might be, oh, I met my 80-year-old neighbor. We became friends. Oh, I learned how to fill in the blank. There are some positive learning moments.
Well, I think you're right. And that's exactly what the teachers, you have this sort of, you're doing exactly what the best teachers are doing, Janeane, because that's what they're, they call them silver linings, and they've said it's incredible to them how even the kids who are really, they're obviously, this is a shared historical experience. This is a shared experience. It's one of the first time. When in the world has every single person in the world had the same experience, but it's not being felt equally.
That's right.
By everyone.
Yes.
But even, so many teachers have told me that even the kids who are really who've had some really difficult experiences because of the pandemic can come up with something like that. Someone who was kind to them, a way that they've been able to help another person that made them feel really good.
Yes.
We have to model that, right? And help them find those, build that capacity.
Definitely. Where can people find out more about you?
Well, I have a website, laurentarshis.com. And the reason I really want teachers and parents to go there is because I have lots and lots of free resources, lots of activities, videos, and lots of resources to help teachers and parents use my books as ways of exploring history.
It's great. Fantastic. And give that one more time. Your website?
LaurenTarshis.com.
Okay. And are you on social media?
I'm on Twitter. Yes, Lauren
Okay.
Tarshis on Twitter. I'm everywhere, but Twitter is really particularly my community. Most of my community is teachers, my teacher who inspire me. So I'd love to see that. Thank you so much, Janeane. What if
This was great.
You.
It was great. And I feel like I'm in Connecticut again.
I know you all this. These are all cricket sound effects just for
I love
you.
it.